Hi, I wanted to take this opportunity to give a quick overview of the way that we'll be doing vocabulary over the course of this semester. Now, in speaking about vocabulary, I realize that that is nothing that is new to you. Ever since you've been in school, you've been studying vocabulary with the goal of building your own personal vocabulary. Now, I am a strong advocate for building kind of like our toolbox of words and skills that you may not use all the time, but of course, it's nice to have certain words, certain tools, certain skills kind of in ready supply just in the event that you need them. So when I talk about why vocabulary matters, what I'm really talking about is how do we enhance our reading comprehension? If we're reading something and we come across an unfamiliar word, what do we do? Do we make efforts to become more familiar with the word or do we skip right over it? Of course, in an ideal world, the goal would be to learn more words so that when you read things, you encounter conversations, you have a better understanding of what is going on in the world around you in terms of spoken and written language. Now, with that comes the ability to communicate and express yourself a little bit more. And not just a little bit more, but a little bit better. Of course, you can use the words that you already know, but it is a valuable skill to be able to pull from words or a word bank that is a little bit more enhanced than what you already know and what you use on a common everyday basis. Of course, this will allow you to communicate better with others and just express yourself in terms of what you're thinking, feeling, etc. And with those two comes education and career opportunities. Not just opportunities, but just the idea of growing and advancing in your education and your career. So I really do champion the idea of building our personal vocabulary just because it does make it more easy, a little bit more easy to communicate and to understand the world around us. Now, of course, usually vocabulary study takes place in two forms. Either you are familiar with word list or morphemes, and you may be familiar with both. Word list, of course, is the list of words that may be a little bit more advanced than what we use on an everyday basis, and the goal is to get those words, memorize them, maybe learn the part of speech, and by that I mean, is it a noun, a pronoun, an adjective, etc., etc. And then you learn how to use that word correctly so that when you encounter the word again, hopefully you'll recognize it and then perhaps you'll start to use that word in your own personal vocabulary. Now, the other side of that coin is learning words using morphemes or morphology, which is learning word parts. Now, this too might be something that you're familiar with, but it's more or less a strategy of word analysis. So instead of learning whole words such as pugnacious, you might learn the parts of that word. What are the prefixes that I see here? The suffixes, what's the root word? So when we think about the prefix, the letters that come at the beginning of a word, the suffix, letters at the end of a word, and then the root, which is the basic form of a word that usually you would attach prefixes and suffixes to. So when we come across an unfamiliar word, if we know some of the parts of the word, like I used the word pugnacious, and if we know that pug is a word, a root word that is used to mean fight, then I might not know the word pugnacious, but when I see it and combine that with context clues, then I can kind of get a general understanding of what the word means, even if I don't have a dictionary definition. So what we're going to be doing over the course of the semester is focusing on developing our or understanding different morphemes, learning different morphemes, different word parts to just make it more simple. And that way we can use that to build a more enhanced vocabulary. Let's take, for example, this sentence. Now, you might be looking at this sentence and you know exactly what it means. You are familiar with these words, and that is great. But let's assume for a moment that you do not know the two underlined words in this sentence. The sentence says, my loquacious neighbor assumed that his friendliness would mask his malevolent intentions. Now, if we saw this sentence in isolation and there's nothing around it, so we don't have any context, So we're not able to quite put together, all right, what is this loquacious neighbor? What does that word mean? And also malevolent, what does that word mean? So let's talk about how using morphemes we could figure out what this sentence is saying. So when we look at the sentence again, and if we notice how we've broken it down, loquacious is a word that is made up of two familiar morphemes or word parts. LOQU means to talk, okay? LOQU, most often when you see it in a word, it is related to speaking. We are familiar with words like eloquent. If you know someone who is an eloquent speaker, that person speaks well. You may also be familiar with the word soliloquy. Soliloquy, if you remember studying any literature in high school or in other college experiences or academic experiences, then you might have read a play. Let's just say Romeo and Juliet. If you've read Romeo and Juliet, where there are scenes where just one person is speaking, either to an audience or to themselves, that is a soliloquy. Now, with that, we have solo and LOQU, loq. So also meaning to talk alone. Okay. So if we did not know that loquacious meant full of excessive talk, but we did know or recognize LOQU as talk and IOUS as full of, then our context could lead me to believe, okay, my neighbor talks a whole lot. Okay. Now, if we look at this word malevolent, same thing. We have three word parts, and there's a little bit of overlap here. And I want you to just kind of notice that this is not as like clear cut as it could be, because there will oftentimes be overlap. So we have mal, M-A-L, we have vol, V-O-L, and then we have lent, L-E-N-T. Mal meaning bad. We are familiar with this, such as malicious, right? Or malpractice in the medical field. You know, you are practicing poorly. It's bad practice. And then we have a vol, which is wish or will. And we think of words like voluntary, right? So you are willing to do something. And then we have the suffix lent, L-E-N-T, which means full of. So if we did not have a definition in front of us, we could look at the word like malevolent and go, oh, that's someone who's bad, right? Or someone who is full of bad will or bad wishes. Now, the dictionary definition of malevolent is having or showing ill will, spite, or hatred. But the benefit of learning these word parts is if we did not have a dictionary in front of us and we came across a word in isolation, we could use our word part skills to know that loquacious is related to talking, someone who talks a lot, just based on the way that the word is constructed. And then malevolent, we could assume that that's something bad based on the way that the word is constructed. M-A-L meaning bad. So we can always assume that there's something bad. We're familiar with words and movies like Maleficent or Malignant, I believe was a recent movie. So you want to think about things like that. Now, so when we talk about making meaning, our original sentence said, my loquacious neighbor assumed that his friendliness would mask his malevolent intentions. Well, in layman's terms, my very talkative neighbor assumed that his friendliness would mask his wicked intentions. So this guy was really, really talkative and overly friendly, or this lady, very talkative and overly friendly, but you could see through their ill will, their hatefulness, their spitefulness, their bad intentions or bad vibes or whatever it is that you want to say. So when I talk about building your own vocabulary, think about that, right? Think about how effective and almost powerful it will be to use a word like loquacious as opposed to talkative, right? Depending on the situation. Or to use a word like malevolent instead of bad or hateful or mean or spiteful or something like that. So with that, Of course, the benefit is that dictionaries are not always available. Imagine on the job, right? If you're on the job and someone uses a word in speaking, a supervisor uses a word that you're unfamiliar with, you want to know what that word means so that you can get an understanding. And even if there's just a nugget in that word, you can say, okay, mal. I heard mal. I know that mal means bad. I can use my context clues to kind of figure out what's going on. So this is a way also to enhance that effective use of context clues so that you can figure out what's going on. And lastly, in terms of our particular plan for how we will study vocabulary this semester, each week you will get a list of 25 word parts, and it's going to look like this. And with those 25 word parts, you'll see the root word or the word part, that's what I'll say, the definition, what it means, and some examples of words that you may or may not be familiar with, and just for fun, the origin of that word part, whether it's Latin, Greek, etc. So each week in general, you will have about one. Notice I put one plus because it may be two, depending on what the assignment is, one or two vocabulary assignments each week just to practice and build those skills. And then we will not take a vocabulary quiz every week, but that will be bi-weekly. So every time you get 50 words, then you'll have a quiz that won't have all 50 words on there, but there will be some of the 50 words, okay? And so we'll talk more about that a little bit later. But I just wanted to give you a little introduction in terms of how it is that we'll be studying vocabulary this semester. I hope that it will be beneficial to you, not just in this class, but across your academic experiences. This is something that you may already be familiar with, and if that is the case, that is awesome. And if it's not the case, I hope that it is something that you find to be beneficial.